I'm Jorge Tellez, Chief Community Officer at Revelo, and today my guest is Taylor McLemore. And Taylor is investor, board director, venture builder, and strategic advisor. He has founded various startups, including a coding bootcamp for veterans and a coding bootcamp in Peru. He graduated magna cum laude from Davidson College, and he currently works as managing director at the Techstars Workforce Development Accelerator and is advisor at Streamlabs. So, Taylor, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me. It's exciting to be here.
So, you have quite a story. You've been founder, venture builder, and investor. How did you start your career in technology?
I'll kind of recast it a little bit as I think of myself just as much as like a pure entrepreneur as technology entrepreneur. And I'm fortunate, I grew up in a family of entrepreneurs. And so I was surrounded by that and got an education at the dinner table growing up. So, that is a unique privilege to have that from, the earliest days of my life. The way that I transitioned from maybe some of that influence into focusing on technology is that I got really lucky. I got to explore through an internship and being an analyst at a venture capital firm when I was early in my college career. So for a couple summers, I worked as a venture capital analyst with a firm based out of New York. And it was back in the days when social networking as we know it today, as pervasive it is, was in its infancy, really. And the partner that I was working with was focused on that space. And he very much was seeing the future of how social networking would really define the internet. And I got to see us both look at the opportunity to, and pursue the deal to be one of the early investors in Facebook and decide not to. Wow. And then also go in a different direction and invest in a different company that no one today remembers or has really heard of. And so, the partner didn't make necessarily the best bet there. He made the best bet he could. But I saw the power and potential of technology to scale solutions. And that's really what got me to fall in love with it early, was just, even though I'm not a technologist, I think I was fortunate to understand how you can build products with technology scale that have a focus on human impact. And that stuck with me from the early days and has kind of carried me through my career, whether it's been as a founder, as an executive for a growth stage company, building a venture studio, and my current role at Techstars.
Yeah, and about funding your company. So after that, you started a company that was accepted into Techstars. Was that your first startup?
Yeah, so I was fortunate to found a company that was accepted into Techstars Boulder back in 2013. Went on to found some other companies across different industries, and it my journey has really mostly been about being a builder. I really enjoy being on the investor side now, but I like to think that part of my superpower as an investor is that in my heart of hearts, I'm really a builder more than anything else. And I think about those problems. And so that's why, repeatedly I focused on how do we get companies stood up and going in that really hard 0 to 1 space, which in my opinion is, all parts of building a company is hard. But building something that doesn't yet exist and going from 0 to 1 is one of the most hardest and most frustrating things, but also one of the most rewarding in my experience.
And, you've been doing this, as you were mentioning, like as a founder, like an investor, and you were also like, there's this very interesting aspect of your career when you were a venture builder. But I don't know, like for people that are not familiar with that concept, I don't know if you can explain it a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. Sometimes we get kind of siloed into how do we build companies or invest in companies. And I think that makes sense to a large degree, but a startup is, hey, we have a problem as a team and we think we have a solution that we should go test in the market to solve it, hyper focused on that one thing. That's a startup, right? Like that's what a startup is at the end of the day. It's a group of people trying to prove that a business model exists in some manner to solve a problem. On the other end of the spectrum, you have like venture investors who don't build companies, right? They invest in the people that are building the companies. And so it's a much more passive approach to supporting new company formation, innovation, et cetera, but a really important one. And then there's this big thing in the middle, right? Everything from as you build a startup, do you focus on just one product or do you build multiple products, et cetera, et cetera. And in the middle, there's this really cool idea, whether some people talk about as a venture studio or venture building. And unlike the investor side, which is very passive and sort of waiting for finding the founders that you want to say, they're the ones, they match what I was looking for, I'm going to put some money in. You have this perspective of like, hey, let's deploy capital to build companies ourselves, but do a portfolio of them. so that you're building multiple companies. And there's lots of different styles and formats to venture studios, whether they're focused on just consumer or SaaS or a region or a type of technology, AI or something like that. Just like all of the different types of venture firms, there can be different venture studio focus areas. But at the end of the day, it's kind of this like, how do we build a portfolio? But like, we're actually building the companies, and we're building more than one. And I think the best venture studios think about it like any company, which is, what is your competitive advantage? So if you're building multiple companies, you don't necessarily have focus on your side, but maybe you have something else that you understand about a market space or a type of technology that gives you a competitive advantage.
Interesting. And so that means that you've pretty much been all over the spectrum into this kind of like, continuum that you just mentioned. And I wonder, like when you're building like a company, regardless of the format or the structure, you always need to build a team, right? So that's kind of like pretty much like the team is everything. So how do you start like building those teams? What are you looking for when hiring your first employees and so on?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, and to your point, like at this point, humans still build companies, robots don't build company, but who knows? Maybe someday, right? We don't know. That might be the future we're marching towards. But as of right now, yes, that is the interesting thing about building technology scale ventures, is it's still inherently human in that like the humans have to figure out how we're going to find the thing that deserves technology scale or internet scale. And so, when you build that team, there's a few things. One is, as an investor, think about this all day long. And it's looking for founders that have founder opportunity fit. And that's that they have some deep experience with the technologies at hand, that they have some lived experience directly with the problem. Maybe maybe it's, something that you and I, Jorge, that we both have passion for is education. And it's like, maybe they come from a background where they didn't have access to education. So who better than a founder that faced that problem to solve that problem? Because, at the end of the day, there are areas where technology is truly the new vector. Like if you can go invent an even better form of quantum computing, go do it. Like, that'll be very valuable for not only you, but everyone in humanity, hopefully. But then most of the things that get built are really just applying other technologies to human problems. And so that's why I really focus on this. Like, do you have lived experience? Do you have connection to the mission? And like, are you motivated to do it? And whether that's the founders or the early employees, that alignment between problem space and opportunity space in the team is critical. Because you could have the most brilliant person, but if they don't understand the problem or don't care, they're not going to be successful. It's so hard to build something new. So you have to not only have that alignment, but the passion. And so look for those things. As you start to build additional team members, you have to embrace the fact that it's a startup. You don't have everything you need. Like you started this journey, it's like you're hiking across a mountain range and you left with not enough supplies. So you're going to have to find some along the way. And so you have to like not sort of pretend that doesn't exist. You have to embrace that exists and say, what are the most important things for this team to get to the next step of the journey where we can hopefully get more resources and then address more of the things we need. So I would say not only this idea that gets talked about all the time of like, hey, build complementary teams. And that's true, but it's overly simplistic. The broader point is, how do we say, what are the few critical things that will get us to the next step of the journey? And do we have the right people on the team to focus on those things? Because having a few people that try to focus on everything doesn't go anywhere. Having a few people that focuses on the few right things that actually moves the needle and helps you not confuse motion for progress, that's how you get this flywheel going that's so hard from the early stage space, as you try to prove that there's actually a solution here, the market's willing to pay, there's a flywheel that can spin.
Right now, since we're talking about tech startups, tech talent is one of the main things that actually will allow you to build, like a product that will, I don't know, allow you to succeed in this space. So, my question here is like, how do you start like attracting, those developers that will allow you to get to the next, stage?
Yeah. So we live in a hyper competitive environment for talent, globally, and it becomes more and more competitive. Fortunately, that means that the demand for talent is creating more people getting pulled into the global economy for technology, and like that's a massive human opportunity for people to that have technology skills or want to gain them over time, to access a labor market that might not be available to them locally, but is available to them through global connectivity that could be life-changing for them and their family. And like, first of all, I believe that is one of the most positive things to come out of, the broader idea of just like, is technology good or bad? It's creating a ton of human opportunity today, tomorrow, next year, not just sort of what will technology do for humanity 10 years out. Now, the thing is, the technologist who's going to help you go from 0 to 1 or 1 to 10 versus the technologist that wants to work at Microsoft are usually very different people with very different motivations. And so I think the first thing is to understand not just like, what is the stack that they need? Like, are they, focusing on front end, back end, what languages are they proficient at? Like, yes, that's table stakes. But once again, even if they have that, they might not be successful in your environment. And I'm borrowing this idea from Brad Feld of this idea. I don't believe you can actually motivate people. People decide whether they want to be motivated or not. That's their choice.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And so you have to create an environment of motivation, and then they make that choice. So then if you back up to your team building, you have to ask the question as you're looking at one person versus the next to bring on, will they be motivated in the environment that we've built? And have we built the best environment to motivate such people? So that's everything from, what is our mission? How are we communicating it? Why is this meaningful? Beyond just sort of like, we'll make money. Now, there are people out there that just want to make money. They have the right to do that. There's people that are also willing to forego some level of compensation because they feel like they're working on something meaningful. And at the early stages, you probably don't have the money to compete with Facebook, Google, and Microsoft, or any of the other global competitors for tech talent. You just won't win. They'll be able to outspend you every time. So you have to optimize around like, what else motivates, and whether it's the mission of the company, the culture of the company, and how you all interact, whether you're providing opportunities for growth and development, even things like benefits that, other companies might be offering, but you could be creative on. You have to differentiate at the end of the day and attract for things that are non-monetary, because that's the only way you can win. The other thing that I'd really highlight here is focusing on values. If you define like, not just this is our mission, we want to change whatever thing about the world to make it better, but here's our values. Here's the things we believe to be true about ourselves and how we will make decisions on that journey. And you can incorporate that into how you look at a person, and not just say like, like we all know that building diverse teams is really important, and diverse teams outperform non-diverse teams. All that's true. But the question is also, is there values alignment? Because you can have a diverse team with different values that can be highly dysfunctional.
Good point.
And so if you build into your hiring process and how you look for that talent, especially on the technical side, to say, what are your values? When you face a hard choice, how do you make that choice? The more that you get alignment there, the faster you'll be able to go as an early stage company.
One of the things that you mentioned is that, that we are facing like a hyper competitive, tech talent, landscape and so on. And I wonder, like, what's your take on, remote teams? Do you think that's the way that startups can compete to get, or to tap into high quality talent? Or what's kind of like your take on that?
Yeah, I have two answers to this. My first one is there is no one right answer.
Okay.
But my right answer is that like, I'm all in on remote. That I don't believe that to be a universally true statement for every company. There are and this is why you just have to decide, like, what are our values? How do we collaborate? How do we make decisions? And are we, as especially founders or early stage team members, more capable of embracing an in-person environment, a remote environment, or hybrid? And different teams will choose different things. And as long as they think about what aligns to them and their chance of success, that's the most important thing. Now, I believe that, and this touches on something you said earlier about just access to the best talent globally. Like, why would you constrain yourself to who lives within driving distance when we have a world with billions of people? I think that's a silly constraint to apply, because I believe that there are very meaningful and effective ways for remote collaboration. And that doesn't mean you can't get in-person connection at times. Bring the team together from time to time, whether that's quarterly planning, retreats, whatever the things are. You can also do that, because the truth is, humans in the same space is a different interaction versus humans over Zoom. That's just science. But it's not an or statement, in my opinion. And why not unlock the global talent market for your team? You do have to act differently. You have to communicate differently. You have to document decisions differently. You have to share common knowledge differently. It's a different form of overhead. With the all in-person team, your overhead is paying rent. With remote teams, it's, Oh, we actually document our decisions and we write them down because we might be working asynchronously more than synchronously. It's a different form of overhead. And you can't get away without paying some form of overhead. So like that's the main part. I would say in the middle, people are going to get stuck in the middle. They're already getting stuck in the middle. Pretending that you're going to get hybrid for free is a lie. You end up paying both forms of overhead.
Interesting.
And like that to me is the trap. Like if there's one where I'm like, not a good idea, it's hybrid, because it's just, well, especially for early stage teams. Big companies are a different story, but early stage teams doing hybrid, you usually end up paying both forms of overhead. You optimize for neither, and everyone's grumpy.
Interesting. You mentioned about like the different mechanisms and tools that you need to do or you need to implement when having one over the other. And I wonder, kind of like, what's the framework or the kind of like platform that you have to build in terms of I don't know, like KPIs or decision making processes or rituals and so on that you have seen successful startups or successful remote teams implement in order to kind of like build better companies.
Yeah, it's a great question. I would kind of like to, because I believe a lot of the audience that's going to be listening comes from a technical background or has some
Yeah.
visibility. I would say think about it the same way you make tech stack decisions.
Mhm.
Like bad tech stack decisions are like, why should we use Node? Well, because I like it. Bad answer, right? Like the question of
Yeah.
like, we should use Node because it'll be performant in this way given the application we're trying to build. That's a much more reasonable way to like pick a part of your tech stack. Um, Similarly, think about like what is the outcome you're trying to achieve. And the outcome you're really trying to achieve with the stack that you're talking about is communication. So don't get stuck on the tool choice first, because you can get into these great debates. KPIs, OKRs, EOS. Like in my mind, they're mostly just, these are just like forms of religion that are more similar than they are different. And they mostly solve the same things with just slightly different approaches. They have pros and cons. I'm not saying that they're the same. They're definitely not. And maybe one is better for what your company is trying to solve than another. All true. But like at the end of the day, KPIs aren't about numbers. They're about common communication as a team for alignment to say, are we all rowing the boat the same way? And so if you start there and ask the question of like, how can we row the boat the same way? That's a better way versus getting stuck on what I think a lot of blogs and recommendations out there is, oh, this is the way to do it. No, what's your way to do it and why? That's the place to start. Because you can do everything from building your own, because you're like, hey, you know what? Building custom things is part of our culture, some of our values. Do it. If you're like, hey, we're about efficiency and speed of execution, go pick up the OKR book and just move fast. So choose what's right for you as you build your stack and think about the outcome.
That's a really good point. And I wonder, now that let's say that you choose to be remote, you are, hiring talent and so on. What about like retention? Have you seen like any kind of like issue about I don't know that remote teams have in terms of retention, in terms of now that they don't have these the kind of like daily interactions, that foster that cohesiveness like in teams.
Yeah. So, kind of going back to a point I made previously, humans being in the same space is just different. So like I think you need to like solve for some of those big tentpoles first. Like, hey, can we actually build times that we do come together as people? Because this flat screen version interaction of humans is not the same as hearing how another person actually laughs. Being in a similar space, like our physiology is built to interact that way. And so like if you don't build that in, you're going to be facing a bigger challenge at some level. Now, this like, do you need to replace standing around the water cooler or whatever it is every day? Like, I think they're like for a lot of people, like they sort of liked that, but there's lots of other interactions that are more meaningful. Like if you're like, would you prefer a short, sort of low, sort of depth interaction around the water cooler for 90 seconds a day, 5 days a week, or would you like to have a meaningful conversations for 20 minutes with one of your colleagues once a week? Some people might take the former and some might people take the latter, but you can organize both in virtual spaces. So you just really need to think about like, how do you do that? And don't do it in a transactional way. It's how can you do it so that people actually feel that they're getting connected? And just like we would build a product, build these things and these routines in your organization like you would build your own product, which is you have a hypothesis, you build the thing, and then you measure and test, and then you learn what got wrong and you iterate on it. Whereas we're just like, I don't know, I think we should do like happy hour meetings. You're like, I don't know, does our team actually like that? Like, we usually implement it, but then don't actually do the other parts like we would build any other product. The more that you think of your company and how your company connects as a product, the more successful you'll be.
Yeah, and it goes back as well, to some of the kind of like, you were mentioning about picking the right tools that will address your needs and making decisions based on your objectives. And I wonder what are other pitfalls that you've seen, startups fall into, when making this kind of like remote team, decision.
Yeah. I think one thing is confusing quantity over quality as the direction to success. You're just like, well, we communicate on Slack all the time. How could we not be a highly connected team? Well, I don't know. Like, are you talking about useful things? Is it helping people be productive? If it's just a bunch of noise, then like that could be worse, right? So focus on the difference between quantity and quality, and bias towards quality at all points. So that could be like, how are we using Slack? How are we using whatever tool? Those sorts of things. The other really sort of just like emotional level piece that I'll say is I think that we sometimes forget that the main thing that keeps an employee at a company is a sense of belonging. This has been talked about for decades. It used to be the Gartner concept of like people are less likely to leave their job if they have a best friend at work.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
and real and like this is a concept that's been around forever. And I'm sorry, it's not Gartner, it's Gallup is built that concept. But that's been around forever. But and like really what that distills down to is like, do you feel a sense of human belonging, connection beyond this is the place that pays me to show up and do some stuff? And so there's multiple ways to like organize and architect that. There's multiple ways to measure that. And more than anything, just ask your team. They're smart people. Be like, hey, what would make you all feel more connected? Versus thinking that you have to invent something that they couldn't tell you. You might need to be creative and use some design thinking as we would with any other product we would build. But start by just asking them what they want.
Interesting. There's another interesting, fact about your background is that when you were in the Venture Studio, you actually like started coding bootcamp in Peru, and it was quite successful. And you were interacting with a lot of Latin American developers and so on. So I wonder, what you can tell us about that experience and of working with other tech talent from other countries and with the cultural differences and so on.
Yeah. I think that like the most like I'm going to say things that are contradictory here, but um,
Okay.
it's like that interaction is mostly the same, but it's also different.
Okay.
And the biggest piece is that if you talk to technical people, engineers, product builders across the world, most of the core themes are exactly the same for what motivates them and what makes them happy. And well, money and compensation is part of it. It usually isn't at the top of the list. It's, are they building something that is meaningful and matters? And do they feel as though they're learning and growing? Like, now you can't pay them nothing and give them those two things, but you can actually pay closer to the average in a market versus at the top if you give them those two things in a really strong way. Now, that is true of almost every market that I've ever been in, interacted with engineers, no matter what language they spoke or where they came from. Because at the end of the day, the people that are truly builders and technology, like there are people that can code because it was a job that they learned and they can make good money at it. And then there are the people that love building. And there's kind of a difference between there. And I'm talking about the builders. And they're the ones that you actually want on your team, especially at the early stage. Someday you might need to hire a bunch of people that are just willing to code and or more are kind of a mercenary mentality. Early days, you need people that just love building and are aligned with what you're doing. That is universal across cultures in my experience. Now, the thing that is different is how you communicate and how you make the mission relevant to them. So it's something that I learned going down to, and this is where it's different. The US culture from, and this is kind of some like anthropology and sociology terms of like how trust is built in the US professional environment is referred to as transactional. And that doesn't mean shallow, but it means like, how do you build trust with a colleague is transactional, meaning the way that I learned to trust you, Jorge, is that we've worked on some projects, you hit your deadlines, your work was of decent quality. And so I'm like, no, like we can trust Jorge on this next project. We definitely want him on this project team. That's how sort of the American and a little bit more of like a Western European perspective on it. in especially across Latin America, and what I learned deeply in Peru is there's more of a relational trust building method,
It is.
which is, it's like, do you care if your team members hit the deadlines? Of course. Do you care about the quality? Yes. But the way that actually you build deep, deep trust is you're like, I know their family. We had dinner together. I know their kids' names. In the US, you can get away with not doing that and have high trust. You cannot get away with doing that, with not doing that in at least Peru and the broader LATAM context if you want to build deep trust. And so understanding these dimensions, such as transactional trust development versus relational trust development, are really critical. And it varies country to country. You can even region to region within countries. But like just paying attention to some of those elements, because if you don't, these universal things will be lost. And you need to figure out what that local translation layer is.
And I know that it's maybe some startup that I don't know is racing like a series A, or maybe like a little bit before, right? Like a seed series, and it's trying to extend their team, and maybe like they're considering among different options, kind of like build a team with LATAM developers and so on. What would you say to them? In terms of like what are your recommendations based on your experience, on what you've seen on how to do this successfully?
Yeah. Especially as it relates to Latin America, I think the collaboration opportunities and the sort of talent connectivity opportunities between North America and South America are massive. First of all, it's funny if you go ask Europeans about and you're like North America, South America, they're like, "There's one America. What are you all talking about?" I'm like, "Well, you don't live here, you don't get it." But like the best part is time zone alignment. If there is need for good productive work, because that's the first thing is like, how important is it that we are working synchronously or asynchronously? And that varies a lot, right? Like if you're doing creative product design, synchronous work's really important. If you're doing QA testing, it might be less important, especially if it's sort of routine testing elements and you all kind of know what to expect in the QA flow. Less critical. Not saying that there shouldn't be some synchronous element, but less is probably just fine. So think about the split between synchronous and asynchronous, because the second you do that, geography starts to disappear. Because whether someone I'm connecting with on Zoom across the city from where I live here in Denver, or if they're in Sao Paulo or Buenos Aires or Lima, starts to not be any different than if they were here in Denver, as long as we think about how synchronous versus asynchronous it is. And then the best thing is to also just really dive deep to how can you connect to that community in an authentic way. Because they're just showing up and just being like, hey, we just pay a lot of money. Maybe some people take that, but it's inauthentic. I think that's really unfortunate. I think that's the wrong way to build teams. So spending some time to be like, hey, why did we pick going deep in Sao Paulo versus Buenos Aires? Like, let me tell you, the Paulistas versus the people from Buenos Aires want to know your answer, and they will care.
Yeah. And I don't know, now that you're here, I'm gonna kind of like take the opportunity to ask you about like the future trends, in workforce and the future of work, since you've been, I don't know, like having maybe like 20 startups or 20 something startups that work on those areas. So any interesting trends that you are seeing right now in terms of tech talent, or or teamwork, or anything about that?
Yeah. I'll highlight one major one that is not new, but I believe is at an inflection point of change. And I think the technology industry globally is helping drive that change. And it's skills-based hiring. And it's the idea that we should hire people because they have the skills for the job, not because of what school they went to. And this is really hard because it's deeply embedded in our cultures. And I say cultures intentionally, of like US culture, many Latin American cultures. Like if a young person today goes to their family dinner on Sunday and is like, I've decided not to go to university and I'm just going to go get the certificate thing and then I'm going to get a really high paying job, all of the older people around the table will tell them that they're crazy and that it's impossible.
Yeah.
And it's not. But also, that's because we've built this culture that's reinforced degrees and sort of prestige of institution that you studied at as the main gateway to what opportunity would be. And it wasn't untrue in the past. So we shouldn't hold that against past generations, but we know it's possible. And there's no better example than technology to say, like, I don't have to go to, whatever the great school you want to use as an example. I'll pick on, US, like you don't have to go to MIT to be a great software engineer. In fact, many of the best software engineers in the world have never stepped foot on MIT's campus. And like, that's a great thing. MIT can do all the great things it can, but also you don't have to go through these bottlenecks of opportunity anymore. education is broadly available. It doesn't mean like, the courses that are available to everyone free online are the best, but like there are pathways to get the skills to be successful in jobs. But here's the big piece. As employers, the people building teams, we're the ones who can actually make the change, because the students that are out there gaining the skills need us to appreciate that they have the skills for this to work. We have to take on our jobs description. We have to take off the requirement that says, hey, we want you to be a software engineer, and you have to have an undergrad degree. Why? Like, should I, like, unless I have a true reason that I care that you also did like these other elective requirements around like literature and stuff, like, and maybe you do, but my guess is you actually don't. What you care about is that you're hiring a good person with integrity that has the skills to do the job. So drop the degree requirements, focus on what skills are actually needed. Now, this is a really hard thing to do because it's not just like, oh, we'll change your job description. This is a culture change, and that's hard. But if we do that, and we start to prove, because technology is a great place because these skills are actually measurable, right? We can look at a repo and see, were you actually able to commit code that worked? Those sorts of things. It's a lot harder in other spaces, right? Like if you're a ballet dancer, there's no repos. It's a very different world. So we can prove to the rest of the industries across the world that skills-based hiring is more fair, creates better access, leads to more diverse hiring, and builds better teams. Like, to me, this is the moment when hopefully skill-based hiring that's been discussed for decades can be proven as the model of the future.
It's interesting. So, to finalize the interview, I have like some rapid fire like questions, and they're like really simple, silly questions, but I think it will be like very interesting to see what you have to say about this. So,
Sounds fun.
the first question is, what's the latest book you read?
Good question. I think it was High Growth Handbook. There's some great material in there.
Interesting. The next one is, what's the name of a podcast you are listening now?
Ooh, I would say I've actually been enjoying the New York Times, The Daily, just because I think they do a good job of like taking what is an in-depth article and making it like a rich audio experience on a regular basis.
What's a TV show that you are currently watching?
I'm currently rewatching Yellowstone, which is like sort of like a modern cowboy drama, and I don't know, it just hits all of like the cultural zeitgeist points of like Western American culture. So I love it. It's great.
What's the a tech personality that you admire the most?
Great question. Not many of the ones that are currently being celebrated on a regular basis. I think for me, I'm struggling because like I think that the answer to the question, I'm supposed to like say someone everyone knows, but like it's the founders that I get to work with. So it's someone like Chris Motley from Mentor Spaces, who's like changing what diversity and access to career opportunity is. It's people like that.
That's amazing. Who's the historical figure that you admire the most?
Admire the most, man.
Or someone that you would be interested in, I don't know, having a chat with?
Yeah. I think that I'm really bad at these rapid fire questions, which makes them, I don't know if it makes it good content or bad. The person that comes to mind is Grace Hopper. I've always found her to be fascinating because she touches on a few areas that I'm interested in. So she was an early computer science leader in the United States. She was also a member of the military. And one of the things I care about is supporting the military community here in the United States and their pathways into technology and entrepreneurship. And she was leading both as a leader in the military and a leader of computer science, not only just as a great leader, full stop, but was blazing the trail as a female leader as well.
Yeah. And the final one is, what's the most important piece of advice you would give to technology leaders?
Start with yourself. We love to have all this advice about like, how to achieve product market fit and, hyperscale and blitz scale. And that's all great. But like, here's the truth. If you're not working on you, the whole thing's going to fail. Because we all have work to do on like how are we taking care of ourselves? How are we showing up? How are we setting the tone and example for our team? That's our greatest influence. And that's the one that actually compounds even faster than technology scale. And if you don't, you won't be as successful. You won't grow as fast. Your company won't grow as fast, et cetera. And the downside risk is if you really don't pay attention to it, like we look at these companies that show up for being toxic cultures and those sorts of things. I point to the leaders didn't actually focus on themselves and like what responsibilities they have in the world. So start with yourself.
Well, Taylor, thank you so much, for having this amazing conversation, with us. I think we learned a lot about building remote teams and, hiring in kind of like fast growing startups. So is there like any kind of like final words or parting words that you want to say?
Just keep building. That's what we need from all the builders out there is keep building, because we're only getting started on the solutions that this world and all the people that live in it need.
Perfect. So thank you very much. And for all of you watching, see you next time. Thank you.